My estranged mother, who had vanished 6 years ago in a whirlwind of betrayal to flee with a worthless lover, reappeared one stormy night, unleashing chaos and deceit upon our quiet existence. Before I reveal the full tale of what unfolded, allow me to set the stage. I, a 22-year-old woman, have spent these past 6 years in the steadfast care of my 53-year-old father ever since my 48-year-old mother abruptly deserted us. There was never any sign of a loveless marriage. One calm, unsuspecting day, she simply evaporated, leaving my father nothing more than a cold email, and within a year, the marriage was over. No alimony ever followed, for rumors whispered that she'd been unfaithful for nearly a year, the only grievance that seemed to burn within her. Otherwise, by all accounts, she appeared to be managing just fine. A few friends, whose own mothers had once shared her confidences, managed to relay scant updates about her clandestine exploits. My father, ever the gentle guardian, did his best to shield me from the fallout, insisting that her missteps were born not of malice but of a confused, misguided heart. Even after she abandoned us without a backward glance, he refused to smear her name with bitterness, offering her every chance to redeem herself, though to me, she slithered back like a venomous snake. It was under these circumstances that he gained full custody of me, not out of desire but simply because he never sought to claim me outright, a fact hardly surprising given the close bond we'd nurtured in the absence of her. After the divorce, we rarely glimpsed her face. She'd moved to the suburbs with her boyfriend, lodging with his family, a temporary arrangement, I suspect, for both were utterly inept, her having never earned a dime and him, a college dropout for 6 long years. Then, as if conjured by fate's cruel irony, last week she appeared at our door with all her meager belongings, pleading for my father's forgiveness. She claimed that the man she once ran off with had been entangled in a sordid affair with another woman for the past 3 months, and after a bitter clash in which he cast her aside, she'd spent 2 dismal nights in a hotel before seeking refuge with the one man who, despite everything, still held a soft spot for her. I, however, could not bear the sight of her. My eyes ached with the memory of the devastation she wrought upon my father, who had once been a vibrant man but was reduced to a hollow shell until I helped him claw his way back to life. He resumed his daily routines with mechanical precision, work, errands, the habits he once cherished, yet genuine smiles and hearty laughs became as rare as shooting stars. I knew he had sunk into a long, dark depression after her disappearance, though with time and therapy, a faint light began to shine through the gloom over the past few years. My mother had shattered him in a way no one should be broken, and thus my deep-seated hatred for her was both natural and justified. I made it clear, right in front of her, that she had no place under our roof. Still, my soft-hearted father insisted he couldn't turn her away, especially since, in the dead of night, she arrived looking every bit the picture of helpless despair, mascara running like rain down her cheeks and her hair wild from days without care. She'd studied her part well, knowing exactly how to tug at his heartstrings. Before my very eyes, my gentle, compassionate dad welcomed her in, promising she could stay for as long as necessary to untangle herself from her entanglements. That night, I barely exchanged a word with her, the silence heavy with suspicion, yet my curiosity burned fiercely. I had to know where she'd been and what dark deeds she'd been hiding over these lost years. Unfortunately, inquiries with friends whose mothers once mingled with hers led only to dead ends. It seemed that for 6 long years, she had vanished not just from our lives but from every familiar circle, and even her own kin refused to speak of her. Left with no other recourse, I resolved to delve into her digital world, her phone, her laptop, driven by an unshakable feeling that her unexpected return smacked of ulterior motives. I hesitated at first, wrestling with doubt, but on the 3rd night of her intrusion, my father pulled me aside and, while she was out grocery shopping, quietly confessed that he was considering giving her and our broken past another chance. His words sent a surge of panic through me. I exploded in protest, convinced that nothing about her return was innocent. He tried to calm me, insisting he wasn't planning on remarrying her but merely attempting to recapture the semblance of their former life. Still, my instincts screamed that she had returned for a reason far darker than mere remorse. My protest, though perhaps overbearing, spurred me to a dangerous resolve. I had to sneak into her room and examine her phone for any trace of a hidden agenda. I couldn't risk my father's disapproval, so I devised a meticulous plan to breach her privacy under cover of darkness. Aware that she would have password-protected her devices, I invited an old childhood friend, now an ethical hacker, to join me, ensuring nothing would raise suspicion. Fortunate as I was that she slept so soundly, bolstered by the melatonin I'd slipped her, I managed to extract her phone and laptop. But rummaging through her backpack, I uncovered a secret pocket concealing yet another phone, which I swiftly confiscated and handed over to my trusted ally. By morning's pale light, we uncovered a sinister truth. She was in constant contact with her alleged ex-lover, conspiring together to swindle my father of a staggering fortune. My father, a dedicated heart surgeon, contrasted sharply with her lover, a man who once eked out a living at a bowling alley after abandoning us, and the arithmetic was damning. They were engaged in a meticulously planned con. My mother and her accomplice had schemed to rekindle their romance, rebuild her image as a helpless victim, and, through an elaborate ruse, manipulate my father into funneling money into a phony business. My father, ever the champion of women's financial independence, having once even inquired about a career path for my mother when they married, was utterly convinced of her vulnerability. Their plan hinged on his benevolence. Once he transferred enough money, they would vanish, leaving him none the wiser. They assumed I would leave after college, but I chose instead to stay and care for him, knowing all too well the emotional toll of his trials. Worse yet, my mother had confided in her lover about my potential interference, a detail that forced them to court my affections as well. That sudden onslaught of kindness, though suspicious, did little to hide her ulterior motives. I saw right through her charade. With trembling determination, I copied every scrap of data from her devices to serve as evidence, then meticulously returned everything to its proper place. I sacrificed sleep entirely, my eyes burning through the long, restless night, until at 8 a.m., after my friend departed, I finally succumbed to a brief 2-hour nap. It was a quiet Sunday, and I knew that soon the entire house, especially my father, would be awake. Without uttering a word, I placed a call to the police. Within half an hour, officers arrived, and in a flurry of commotion, they hauled my mother away to the precinct. I had already secured the incriminating data onto a pen drive and handed it over. Soon, my mother was detained while the cybercrime department set about verifying the authenticity of the files and seizing all her devices. The morning was a blur of confusion and shattered illusions, my parents reeling in disarray while my mother raged, screaming that I was framing her, her cries drowned out by the stern commands of the officers. My father, attempting to soothe her frantic outbursts, looked as lost and shattered as I suspected he felt inside. After what seemed like an eternity, the cops left with her in tow, kicking and thrashing all the way, and at last I recounted everything to my father in a calm, measured tone. But that was when the cracks deepened. Instead of questioning me, he exploded, declaring that he would soon demand my mother leave our lives for good. His resolve hardened further after she had audaciously asked for $500 the previous night for clothes, a ludicrous sum, considering the oversized duffel bag she'd lugged in, and the fact that she and I were nearly mirror images, meaning I could have lent her a few garments if need be. $500 for mere clothes struck me as absurd, and when he mentioned it with a forced chuckle, it was clear he'd pieced together her true motive, money. He'd also uncovered the secret second phone, and though he didn't grasp every sordid detail, he knew full well that the helpless woman before him was nothing more than a cunning fraud. He planned to confront her later that day and gently ask her to leave, hoping to avoid further police involvement. But I, driven by a need to protect him, jumped the gun, acting in defiance of his wishes. I tried to explain the full extent of her scheme, but he dismissed me coldly, insisting it wasn't my place to call the cops and that he needed time away from me to process the chaos. In the days that followed, he refrained from pressing charges and began to withdraw from me, his silence a painful rebuke, while I remained convinced I had saved him from a colossal scam. In truth, I had no way of knowing that he already suspected my mother's intentions when he spoke of a second chance. In hindsight, I now regret not consulting him before taking such drastic measures. The guilt of my actions, not for her sake, but for the toll it took on my father, became an ever-present weight. That very evening, I tearfully apologized, though he murmured only "it's fine" before returning to his book. I felt the crushing burden of my misstep. I was devastated, unable to understand why he refused to report her to the police, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had overstepped my bounds, disrupting a delicate balance. I longed for the days before her return, when life had been simpler, a time when my father's warm smile was unburdened by betrayal. Yet the storm was far from over. Update 1. In the wake of these events, I sifted through the online comments and realized with aching clarity that I hadn't been the devoted daughter I once believed myself to be. I should have sought my father's counsel before unleashing the authorities, and now regret not at me for acting unilaterally. That very evening, I apologized to him, and although 2 hours later his response was a subdued "it's fine" as he returned to his book, I felt an overwhelming sense of remorse. I still struggled to understand why he chose not to involve the police, though I'm sure his reasons run deep. In retrospect, I now see that I overstepped, and perhaps if I'd communicated better, things might have been different. All I wished for was to mend our fractured normalcy from before my mother's return, but even as I tried, the lingering uncertainty about her fate kept me awake at night. The truth of her actions remained shrouded in mystery, and I wondered if she might ultimately be let off with nothing more than a slap on the wrist. But the real danger was yet to emerge. Update 2. Several days have passed since the police took my mother away, and just 3 days after my heartfelt apology, my father and I finally sat down to confront the elephant in the room. In a hushed, tearful conversation, we cleared the heavy air that had settled between us, and slowly, I began to grasp the tangled maze of his emotions. He confessed that the day she reappeared, he felt as though his old life might miraculously return, a fleeting, almost intoxicating hope. But that euphoria evaporated the next day when he caught her whispering into her secret phone, shattering his romantic illusion. The painful reality dawned on him: my mother had never been the devoted partner he deserved. Though he hesitated to cast her aside immediately, when she later demanded an outrageous sum for clothes, he finally pieced together the truth. He planned to confront her that very night, but I, in my desperation to protect him, took matters into my own hands, an act that only deepened his dismay. Despite everything, his soft spot for her complicated his feelings, and he found himself torn between preventing legal troubles and preserving the last vestiges of their shared past. After she was released and promptly reclaimed her secret phone, the first thing she did was send a venomous text, railing against him for calling the cops, and then blocked him without a backward glance. That final act of cruelty left him venting his frustration on me for days. At last, he came to his senses, apologizing profusely and admitting that perhaps his therapy sessions weren't healing him as they once did. Our shared tears during a long, wordless hug reminded me of the fairy tale love story I had once believed in as a child, a story that had turned bitter with time. Even now, as we cling to each other, the shadow of her betrayal looms large, a reminder that our journey is far from over. Update 3. In a twist that I could scarcely have imagined, my mother has now engineered a comeback, not through a dramatic doorstep return, but by launching a vicious online assault against my father. She has painted him as the villain, accusing him of kicking her out simply because she refused to remarry him. Initially, both my father and I were oblivious to her digital onslaught, blocked from the post until a friend sent me a screenshot that revealed her desperate, baseless claims. The sheer audacity with which she tried to play the victim, spewing lies about the man I once idolized, nearly compelled me to keep the truth hidden from him in order to spare his pride. Yet maturity won over impulse, and I approached him with the damning evidence in hand. His disappointment was palpable, but soon he resolved to take legal action, vowing to safeguard his reputation and dignity. Everyone who knows him understands that he is no villain. His image in our close-knit neighborhood was too precious to allow her slander to tarnish it. As I reflected on how I had even allowed that conniving woman back into our lives, a bitter realization settled in. Sometimes, I wondered if I'd be better off without a mother at all. The thought was as revolting as it was undeniable, and it left me questioning the very nature of our bond, even as the looming threat of her next move sent shivers down my spine. Update 4. Now, after an absence of 2 long months filled with personal upheaval, the budding of a serious relationship with a man I met through a friend, and the relentless grind of my job, I returned to recount the final act of this surreal drama. Amid the whirlwind of new love and career challenges, I also waded through a defamation case against my mother. Though she never landed behind bars, the settlement of $330,000 ensured that her slimy machinations were not without consequence. I still marvel at how she and her worthless boyfriend managed to conjure such a fortune. No doubt, her family intervened to keep her from facing the full brunt of the law. Regardless, they are now irrevocably expelled from our lives. Even if they dare attempt another meddling maneuver, the distant connection my new boyfriend has to a Supreme Court judge, coupled with my father's resolute spirit, will ensure their schemes crumble. Deep in my heart, I believe we are done with them once and for all. They'd have to be unimaginably foolish to reappear after 2 near misses. And yet, in a final, bitter irony, their actions remain as senseless as ever, leaving me to wonder with a shudder, who knows what absurd scheme they might hatch next.